Hello everybody, we're here with a brand new playlist for you guys, and this is going to be on how to use Python. So what exactly is Python? So Python is a high-level object-oriented programming language which can be used to do simple tasks like adding to numbers, and you can also create a neural network using it. You can use it to create whatever you want. So this is going to be the first video in this playlist where we're going to start with the first and the simplest things in Python. So before we get started with coding, the first thing you need to understand is how do we install Python in your system. So what you want to do is you want to go to your web browser and just type Python download, and you'll be taken to some site where you can download Python. So depending on whatever your OS is, for example, I'm using a Mac OS, so I'll download it from Mac. It's already downloaded in my system, but you basically download this Python and you'll get it there. Now, once you have downloaded Python, there are different ways you can write down a code. For example, you could be doing it directly in your terminal or console. You could be using VS Code, but the one I'll recommend you to use is known as Jupyter Notebook. Okay. So for downloading Jupyter Notebook, the easiest thing you can do is go to your terminal or console and type pip install Jupyter. Now, what is pip? Pip is basically a package manager for Python in some sense. So whenever you want to download a package or a module in Python, you basically use pip. So let's go to terminal and let's quickly see what happens. So it's there already. So if I type it, let's see what happens. Yeah, okay, it's downloading it again, and yeah, as you can see, successfully installed, blah, blah, blah. So Jupyter is there on your system now. Now, what you want to be doing is you just want to type Jupyter Notebook, and you'll be taken to that page. So this is what Jupyter Notebook looks like, okay? Now, these are all the pre-existing files. So what you want to be doing after this is go to New, create a new Python notebook, right? And once you have created this, it will open up, and this is where we are going to do all our coding. Now, why would I recommend Jupyter Notebook to every beginner? Because it's more interactive, okay? It's an IDE which is extremely interactive. You can run selected lines of your codes instead of running the entire code. It's easier to debug it, and so on and so forth, right? So the first thing we're going to learn today is variables and data types in Python. So let's rename this file quickly. Oops. Yeah. Okay. Now, the first thing is what exactly is a variable in Python. So whenever you input something or whenever you define something in your system, it needs some memory allocation, right? But you can't have a floating value somewhere in your system. Your system needs to know where exactly is the value stored and under what name is it stored. So that's where a variable comes into the picture. So a picture is basically something that tells the memory that this is the space we have allocated for whatever value you're entering. For example, it could be as simple as a equal to 12. So in this case, 12 is the value that we are trying to store, and a is the name given to it. So whenever you use a, this tells your compiler or your system in general that when you call a, it takes you to the space allocated to this number 12. So when I print after this, so print is a line that we use to print outputs. So when I print a, and if you run this code, you'll see you get 12 over here, right? So whenever you write a, your system knows that this is referring to 12. Right, that is the first thing. So now there are a few rules for defining variable names. So every variable name can include letters, digits, underscore, but you cannot start with a digit, okay? So you can start with an underscore, but it cannot start with a digit, okay? That's the first rule, right? Now there are different data types in Python, which is the second thing in today's thing that we're going to do, data types. For example, in this case, the value we entered was an integer, right? You know it, we know it. And in fact, even Python knows it. It knows that it's an integer, right? There are some different data types that we can see in Python. So I'll write it down here. So first of all, it's integers. Obviously, integers are the normal numbers that we are using, positive or negative. Next, you have floating type values. So what are floating type values? Floating type values are basically fractional numbers. So something like 3.4 or 5.7. These are all floating type numbers, all right? Next, you have as strings. So what exactly are strings? Strings are basically a sequence of characters, all right? It could be anything. And whenever we write a string, we want to put it in between quotes. You write down your string in between these two, and your system will know that it's a string, all right? Next, you have something which is known as Boolean types. So what are Boolean types? There are only two possible values. It's either true or false, okay? So whenever we have statements like if the answer is yes or no, we want to use Boolean type values for that. And the last and the very special one is known as none type value. So none type value is a very specific type which we use in Python to tell that there is nothing stored in it, okay? So it's basically a null thing in some sense, all right? So for example, you could be writing a function, which we'll talk about later, and if that function returns nothing, we can just write return none, all right? So these are the different type of data values that we'll use. So let's quickly look at it. So Python has an inbuilt system where it can recognize data types. And if you, let's say we write, let's go with something else. Let's go with b equal to 15, c equal to 5.7, d equal to, let's say, my name, and let's say e equal to, I don't know, let's go with true, okay? And let's print the type of this. So if you print type of b, let's say, let's see what happens. So if I run this, you can see it belongs to class of integers, right? So Python knows that it's an integer value. So if we modify this slightly, and let's do it for all of them. So for C, for D, let's go with E, yeah. And if I run all of this, you'll see the first one is an integer type, the second one is a floating type, the third one is a string, and the fourth one is a Boolean value, right? If you want, you can also check it for none. And let's go with F. And if I run this again, you'll see it's none type, okay? So we saw an example of all the different data types in Python, all right? Now, there's also another possibility. Suppose you insert or you input some value in Python, or you just write down some value and you want to convert it from one type to the other. You also have that option in Python, okay? So for example, you might start off with something like number equal to, let's say, 17 or 18. Okay, let's go with number equal to 18. Now we know that this is an integer type value, right? But let's say we want to use it in some other context, okay? And we want to convert this to string. So what you can do is you can write down capital N equal to str of num, right? Now if I print both of these, let's say I print num and I print capital N. Let's see what output do we get. Okay, so both of them turn out to be 18, obviously, because they're storing the same value. But what happens if I print the type of these two different values? Let's go with the type of num and the type of capital N. Right, so if I run this now, you'll see that the first one, which is num, actually belongs to the integer class, whereas the second one, which I have converted to a string, and the second one actually belongs to the string values, okay? So this is how you change types from one data type to the other, okay? The next thing which we'll learn today is how do we input values, okay? So inputting values is, see, in all these lines, wherever we use anything, we were inputting the value while we were writing down the code, right? Now, if you want to make your code more interactive, let's say some other person is trying to access your code, you want to give some instructions to that person, right? Let's say you want to ask, input your name or input your age or whatever it could be. So we need a way in which we can feed information into the system while we are running the code, right? Not while we are writing it. So for that, we have this special thing known as input. So it could be name equal to input. So I can write down enter your name over here. And when I run this, you'll see, yeah, as you can see, while the code is running, the compiler is going to ask me to enter my name, right? So let's say I enter Shreyam. Nothing else happens because there's no other piece of instruction after this. But let's say I write down print, let's say hi plus, hi plus name. All right, now if you run this code, let's say I enter Shreyam. As you can see, it says hi Shreyam. Okay, I forgot a space here, but if you do this once more, you'll see that, yeah, now there's a line which says hi Shreyam, okay? So this line that we had here, print hi plus name, this is known as string concatenation. We'll talk about this when we are learning strings, okay? Let's ignore that for the time being. But essentially what I did here is, the system did not know my name previously, right? I entered my name while the code was running, and based on whatever input I gave, the system gave me some other response, right? So it could be any other random name. You could write ABC, for example, and it will say you hi ABC, right? So this code is not dependent on whatever piece of instruction you have given to the system while you were coding, right? That's the idea, okay? So this is pretty much the basics of Python. This deals with variables and data types. One more thing which is very important to remember, whenever you input something in Python, whenever you're inputting something, this could be name or age or anything, the default type is always string. Okay, let's do a very simple test to verify that. Let's again take this, for example. Let's go with age. And let's say enter your age. And let's print the type of this, okay? So type age. Let's say we run this code. Let's say I'm 23, so I'll enter 23 here. You see, it still belongs to class string. So no matter whatever input you give, it might be as simple as it could be fractional values as well. Let's say I enter 12.5 over here. It's still a string, okay? It doesn't matter whatever value you give. You could give a Boolean value, you could give a none type value. The output is always going to have string type, okay? So this is basically the basics of this. In the next video, we'll look at this in more details. We'll talk about what strings are, how to operate with strings, and so on and so forth. So see you in the next video. If you like this, do let us know in the comments.